one thing, if I may, so just everyone, Efenyi is my dear friend and colleague, and we worked together back in the State Department when I was a diplomat for some time. I'm the chairman of the Conferences and Events Committee for UNISMO. So on behalf of it looks like Dr. Abdul Hassan and His Excellency the Minister Abdul Nabi are running a little bit late, so apologies for them. I'm sure they'll be along shortly. Of course, it is we've just begun a few days ago the new Islamic New Year. So happy Muharram to everyone, and thanks so much for everyone for joining us from around the world. It's like after midnight in New Zealand and Australia right now. So God bless you. Thank you for being with us in East Asia. Really quickly, so our focus today, of course, is on trade in and from and involving Africa, particularly the Sub-Saharan part of Africa. And you have a massive proportion of the world's population, and perhaps one of its largest percentages of micro and small and medium enterprises and entrepreneurs in Africa. I think about just Nigeria alone, having everyone I know has like 3 or 4 jobs, and only one of them is usually sort of, you know, the career thing. Everyone is building and creating and sharing and exporting, and so that is a beautiful thing. We need far more of that, and I just thank you so much for being with us, and inshallah we can do this live next year once a lot of these things are past us. So thank you so much for joining us, and I guess we'll go right on to without further ado, Dr. Atif from the World Bank. So thank you very much, Efenyi and Mr. Ministers, and we'll get started. Thank you.
Thank you. So Dr. Atif, if you're with us, please, you have the floor. Please present your paper. I'm going to stop screen sharing right now.
Okay, great. Okay, is it clear? Yeah, I shared
yes,
now
we
the
can
screen.
see.
Yeah.
Yes, we can see.
So I first start by thanking all the colleagues organizing such wonderful meeting, UNISMO and the colleague in Africa. I really I'm really happy to be part of this founding committee for the new organization, which really coming in a good time. As by the given time to me, I'll try to be very quick and very to the point. I understand that the title which I should talk about it today is very vast and very. Everyone in Africa, when we talk about the government, we have different perception and background, and that things which coming to directly talking to what is a government and what is its role. I will just use, I like quotes. I will start by a quote from the book, which is I found it very nice, merging what we know about the SMEs and the entrepreneurship, as we are in the era of entrepreneurship, which is a new form of small business, which creative and very growing. So the quote from the book from Story mentioning that there is a little doubt that the small businesses that become middle size are and ultimately large businesses over a comparative short time period are central to economic prosperity. If we talk about Africa today, and today we are talking about the business and how to develop the trade and the business, so we talk about the prosperity, and the society needs that such kind of prosperity. So ultimately, the ability of a country to nurture the growth of such businesses is probably the most important element in the enterprise development. And I use surprising this chart, which is shocking little, but it is a kind of IMF reports, which historically, and you can see to the left, we have a sample comparison between GDP per capita between Africa and China. And if you see for the left hand, you have the situation what was in 1980, where most of African countries having higher GDP per capita more than China. And if you look to the right hand of the figure, where this color, you see China overpassed all the African countries, and particularly, no country in the African continent perhaps except one example, which is not outcosting China in GDP per capita. And I guess everyone knows, if we detail, and we need another session to talk about what is China SMEs ecosystem and how the government in China. I guess China's government is most of supportive government in the world to the SMEs, and the history of their organization, their multiple layer of organization, well known for a lot of people. So if we understand what is the exact role of the government and supporting the SMEs in Africa, I would start by saying, okay, why and how can we perceive the role of the government in supporting the SMEs? So I start by seeing how they feel, what are the perception and the problem facing the SMEs in Africa. In front of us, we have a sample graph from the Doing Business report. Doing Business report published by the World Bank, and it is started in 2009 as a tool for developing the ecosystem of businesses in the world. And it's a global tool, global report, which is editing annually the situation in each country. So here we have a very symbolic representation of the main obstacle, main problem, main challenges facing SMEs and businesses in Sub-Saharan in Africa. As you see, dramatically, you see as the color is thick. Here we have this is the side of the problem. Yeah.
Doctor, I'm sorry. It's not in. Can you put it in a presentation mode, please? It's the screen is not changing, and the type is kind of small. I apologize.
Yeah, this is you have seen this. I'm sorry for that. Okay.
So we see page 3 now.
Yeah, you have seen it before. I'm sorry.
If you can just put this into presentation mode, I think it's a different mode within in the sharing option. Thank you.
Okay. So I start. You have seen here. I guess that we started by here.
I think you're on 3 or 4 now. I'm not sure.
Okay, we start by 3. So this was a comparison mentioning that how far Africa started. I compare with China, the ecosystem where the comparison GDP per capita. GDP per capita represents the whole gross domestic production, which is a whole activity in the country. Here we have a comparison between the situation in 1980 and the situation in 2016, where the development in China is over, past, and this is one of the examples. So I will use a kind of tools to understand what is the situation currently of SMEs in Africa. So one of the major tools which we use it normally, which is the Doing Business report. Doing Business report is a tool, as I mentioned earlier, to measure the health, the performance of the ecosystem of the businesses in the country. And this is a last report 2020, and you see the graph here showing that the case of the layer here showing the circle, how many parameters we have, certain parameter, about 12 parameters to measure the efficiency of the business environment and ecosystem in the country. And you see that Africa is suffering from the access of finance, as you see here, the electricity, participation of in the market, the competition, the political instability, the tax rates, the corruption, the access of the land, and the major problem is the taxes, and we end by transportation and crime. So if we ask African businesses, African businessmen and entrepreneurs and business owners, what are the major problem you have? And the Doing Business report is asking both. We ask entrepreneurs, we ask officials, and we ask the people of opinion about their feeling about the climate of business in the country. So we have tremendously amount of people are complaining about the access to finance, about electricity. And if you go to doing business in Asia or Europe, you will find different obstacles, different challenges. So we have to understand the situation in Africa. If we go to young entrepreneurs in Africa, and this is a study undertaken about 6 years back also by one of the global entrepreneurship mentor reporters, mentioning that you see the major obstacle for young entrepreneurs is admin and regulation, which is hindering sophisticated the startup process. How to start business is not yet facilitated in all the African countries. We have a startup finance, we have marketing, we have finance for growth. Here we have more details about managerial skills. I mean, young entrepreneurs who will start having a problem of skills, a problem of lack of training, lack of entrepreneurial culture as well. And if you go another example, here I'm trying to understand what exactly the problem of SMEs in Africa and how we can imagine the role of the government to solve this and to come up with solutions. So this is a recent study established in 2018 regarding in Zimbabwe. About 40 SMEs are questioned for SMEs manager. What are their perception about the ecosystem of SMEs in Zimbabwe as a country? And here we have, as usual, that practitioners are guided that majority of provision of policies are complaining little about what the government is proposing as a solution for the SMEs in the country. And here you see in red, unfortunately, the results of this survey showed that the government acts both as a stumbling block and facilitator. In fact, the government should be a facilitator for all the work, as the government is the guard of the ecosystem for a business in the country. In some countries, the guard, the facilitator become an obstacle, become a stumbling block. And unfortunately, due to a lot of things, we know it better than anyone in Africa, and particularly we talk about a lot of time. And in the doing business, we see chapter about corruption and how the corruption is really growing. This is a third example of the obstacle seen by the SMEs owner in Egypt. As you see that we have a problem majority in access to finance, electricity, tax rate. So we have, if you go and try to understand what the SMEs in Africa are suffering from, before going to the free treatment agreement and opening boundaries and exchanging goods and make trades, we are facing kind of domestic challenges with finding money, doing the business properly, and particularly find the energy in terms of electricity and later on the land. So if I would like to summarize what the SMEs in Africa are facing as a challenge, we see that contrary to another continent like Latin America and European continent and Africa, we suffer from informalization. A lot of SMEs in Egypt are not in formal sector. Majority are in formal sector. Access to market, lack of entrepreneurial training. We don't have a lot of training courses all over the continent. Some countries are very advanced, others are still lag. Lack of collateral security for loans, a high non-performing loans ratio. I participated personally in several studies showing the non-performing loan rate, which is non-paid loans. A lot of people, if we facilitate the obtention of loans, they are not able to pay it back. So we have the banks are suffering from this non-performing loan, and the appetite of the banking to give more money is less. So the lack of understanding of SMEs need by the bank, as I mentioned, inaccessibility of the bank. And so we see that we have a block. We talk about the free trade agreement ecosystem and facilitating of the exchange, but we have that kind of performance. So just to sum up and not take a lot of time, the role of the government as we foreseen it is regulation, education, infrastructure, financial, ICT. I mean, one of we call it an ecosystem for entrepreneurship, not due to COVID-19, but by the technology change we have a lot of countries are putting efforts in adopting the ICT. So it is no more, I mean, if you look for 10 years back, the ecosystem of entrepreneurship, you wouldn't see this kind of adopting the ICT because now we are working online. So the government should facilitate and invest in the networking, the ICT infrastructure of the country, access to market, equitable opportunity, which comes to the corruption. So just before ending this first part, I have just to mention that we are really witnessing a shift. Since about 6 to 5 years, we have that shift from traditional enterprise policies to growth-oriented enterprise policies. I mean, the focus in that, let's say until the end of the years of the first part of the third millennium, we start to talk from sector, entrepreneur, and geographic to that kind of networking. I mean, the major shift in focus, we are talking more about networking, about agglomeration, about cluster in terms of focus, in terms of objective. We are shifting from entrepreneurs growth, more a new venture focus in high performance and what we call it blockbuster. Now we are willing to have champions. I mean, you heard about Swivel transaction with 1.4 billion US dollar transaction 2 weeks back in Dubai. This is now the government is looking for champion. You know, before we were looking for number, now we are that guy who will blast up the ecosystem. The policy actor, we talk about intervention and by part of entrepreneurial system. However, the new one is connecting. So the shift between the scattered activity where we try to force the ecosystem to make more enterprises. Now we try to make more networking, more champion. And if you go for the time, the technology, for example, we were in 90s and early 20s, we are focused in generating low firm, new firm-based intellectual property. We said, okay, we have high-tech enterprises. Now we talk about innovative enterprises, innovation, the enterprise who will solve the issue of the problem, social problem in the village or in the town where they are. Before we are focusing only on high-tech, this high-tech, the big champion icons of, the technology. If you go last one, the level of policy, we were always talking about top-down policy. I mean, they bring a consultant from the World Bank, from any organization who will advise the Ministry of Commerce to have a certain policy. Now we talk about that kind of regional local level. You know, we have to take care of the village owner, the ecosystem in the village, the ecosystem of the city, the ecosystem, the regional ecosystem. Africa, for example, now is taking a free trade agreement, which is making an Africa a regional hub. Perhaps 5-10 years back, Africa was a separated country. So we have to understand that the government should rethink that which way we are using. Do we use a national enterprise policy or this growth-oriented policy? So as the time is limited, I will focus on one example, because as you see, the obstacles are from the first one, and the biggest one is access to finance. And this is my job, access to finance. And that's why I took the example of financial support. I mean, Africa today has about 44 million SMEs, representing about 33 of the continent gross domestic GDP of the, and creating about 45% of the jobs in Africa. Unfortunately, 70% of those SMEs lack long-term funding, and 80% lack access to the bank credit. And this is fact from the IMF, from the World Bank. And if you go back to the doing business, as I just mentioned, that access to finance is the biggest one. So the last estimation of the money needed for SMEs in Africa is about 331 billion US dollar in gap, or estimated gap. So if you look to the ecosystem of finance and worldwide existing ecosystem of SME finance, you see that venture capital, business angel, the new form, business angel and venture capital are not new, but in Africa, they are not yet developed as such in other areas. Just next to us in the Gulf countries, we have already developed a lot of clubs and a lot of association for venture capital. Crowdfunding, for example, alternative instruments and very weak in Africa. One example, I will focus on this crowdfunding. Crowdfunding now is taking huge interest in SMEs because it becomes a quick, cheap, and very agile kind of finance, where we have estimated in 2017, we have about 153 million raised fund in SMEs by African. We have actually in Africa about 40 to 45 crowdfunding platform, which is the biggest growth in the world in terms of quantity of growth. So if one of the things which I mentioned early in the doing business, that banks are not understanding well what is the need of the SME. So this graph, you can read it from left to right. The different stage of the business itself, from the idea until to the concept, to the prototype, to the starting, to the growth. So we have different needs, and this is very unique. I mean, in ecosystem where SMEs are very flourishing, we have an ecosystem of finance for the SMEs. matching and adapted to each stage. So the question of having this in front of you, this is very known chart, and I didn't invent it. You know, this is used for innovation, where you can start reading the graph from left to right, where we start an idea. We need kind of very innovative, very risk-taking finance. Then when we start, we need a kind of very short-term capital for the seed, where the governments, all the governments in the world are putting a seed capital for the startup, particularly either technology startup or social enterprise who are solving the question. So later on, we have each stage, this kind of risk capital. Mostly all the studies showing that in Africa, we don't have risk capital. Unfortunately, in some countries, even we don't have this kind of development. We have a single model. If you go to any SME bank in Africa, you will find single loan, which is a loan normally, again, it's kind of collateral. You don't have this diversified. So this is the World Bank, again, chart showing that we have 1.7 billion who are unbankable. And Africa, unfortunately, here, you will find that most of block of people who are unbankable. In Africa, we have about, you know, this figure is much as in the South African, South Asian portion. And if you go for the formal micro, small enterprise finance, you see this the gap here, the world gap is for $5.2 trillion US gap. This is a global gap of the finance. Those figures are tremendous figure, and you will see always Sub-Saharan African is one of the leader, and unfortunately, even here the annual format net job required. You see this net job required is the major are in African countries. So just mention that the finance is really a huge issue. I would end by giving some hope. So I will show some example, only two examples. I like Zimbabwe. I'm not very biased for Zimbabwe, but I found a lot of things they are trying to do in Nigeria, South Africa. I mean, a lot of countries, Kenya have an initiative. I selected only two to show the innovation in that. The first in Zimbabwe, that the government is trying to use foreign investment, and particularly trying to get kind of governmental treasury bonds for SMEs. So there is a project started about 4 years back to raise about $50 billion US only for a fund for SMEs. The Egyptian government as well is opened a stock market, particularly for SMEs, and they launched it in 2017, a kind of 20 billion Egyptian pound scheme where they subsidized the rate of interest only for SMEs. So this kind of 200 billion Egyptian pound was already expired within 4 years, and it was forcing the banks to have, as it mentioned here, 20%, see 20% of their loan portfolio to SMEs. This is very creative, where the central bank is forcing banks, all banks, to get a portion of their portfolio, 20% for SMEs. Africa recently created really a nice initiative, which is African Crowdfunding Association. I mean, we need innovative approach to SMEs. Crowdfunding now as a platform for finance, for social finance, it became also a platform for African. And one of the obstacles, as you see in this graph, I'm sorry if the color is not clear, this is African map, where you can see the green color showing the countries where they have legalized the crowdfunding. I mean, it's only Morocco, Tunisia, and here I guess this is Nigeria, if I don't miss it. And unfortunately, the other countries in yellow, they are just in process of legalizing, and the other countries are not. One of the obstacles I'll end by this, that the governments are, even when we have a new innovative tool like crowdfunding, we don't absorb it, we don't welcome it quickly in Africa. It takes a lot of time. So it comes one interesting thing, as I show later on, that the second interesting issue is coming in Africa now, that a lot of countries are opening what we call it social fund. Social fund are now the tool which is enabling normal people to bring money to enterprise. And I mean, in Africa, in Kenya, in Nigeria, in Egypt, and Morocco, and Tunisia, we have now plenty of small funds who are dedicated 100% for SMEs. I know that in Malaysia, for example, they create the Sukuk Waqf, which is people are cotisation, are putting kind of a small amount of money as Waqf to fund and to finance SMEs. You know, innovation So I will end by saying that how government can innovate to support SMEs. One of the innovation going on quickly now in the world, that what we call it regulatory sandbox. A lot of central banks in the world now are creating a tool, to understand what's happening, that the ecosystem of SMEs is now very vibrant. The technology part is very vibrant, but the central banks are sleeping. I'm sorry to say, are not so much vibrant. So the central bank, to enable that, what I just mentioned as a crowdfunding or a social fund or sukuk to fund SMEs, we have to get new regulation. We have to use the technology, the new form of payment, and this. So the central bank worldwide created what we call it regulatory sandbox. It is an office within the central bank where we can create new financial solution. So I understand that what you see in front of you, this is the progress of a number of regulatory sandbox within the central banks and the African banks, and we can see that we have progress. In 2020, we have a lot. We have about 6 regulatory sandbox in 6 countries, showing that in Africa things are moving. Central banks are trying to cope with the changes in the system of finance and try to change also the payment, Bitcoin, all what you heard about this new technology and the financial technology application. So one of the obstacles in Africa was that the central banks are not updating quickly their rule and regulation. So we have a lot of tools worldwide, but we can't use it because it's not yet allowed. So I will end by this 2 slides, that how government innovate can accelerate the free trade agreement. I mean, the free trade agreement is one of the tools which is, we discussed it today, and I know the title of our presentation, that I put some recommendations that to cope with a social change in the society to deliver better public service. Those are not kind of recommendation for the government, is kind of a simplified roadmap to establish a culture of innovation. National innovation systems are existing in most of the world, but in Africa, few countries have really developed that, what we call it national innovation system. Partner with a champion of the change, as I mentioned, began. So I end by my takeaway from this quick talk. I mean, survivor or SMEs in Africa needs, in order, very simple, I put 6 points. Make the SMEs and entrepreneurial support a governmental priority. You look for the governmental priority and strategic vision in all the countries. In Gulf countries, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Dubai, you will find that SMEs is a priority, national priority. So this puts the cap. Everyone in the government is working for the SME. This is the first. The second, ensure the government policy is broad focused. The issue which we have, that we don't encompass all components of the ecosystem within this kind of the governmental plan. We have to have that the guy who is making the tax, the guy who is facilitating the electricity payment and connection, the guy who is working in the bank, the guy who is working work permit, all those should be kind of encompassed in all. We don't reform only the finance and we let down the other part. We don't resolve the issue. Allow the natural growth or not top-down solution. I mean, one of the major doing business findings in the last 5 years of doing business, that some African countries, I talk about the third point, some African governments are starting to use this shift from top-down solution. Top-down solution, the solution coming from up. So we don't take opinion of the direction, the SMEs owner, the entrepreneurs who are here, and we don't take also opinion of the local ecosystem, like building the existing industries. When we build, we import some concept we are not welcoming in the ground. So now we have to think about how to build from existing industry that have formed naturally within the region or the country. In Africa, we have tremendous amount of raw material and we are exporting raw material. And some of the champion of the reform of business environment, that how can we capitalize on this? How can we use value chain? And the World Bank report of 2019 was entitled Global Value Chain and Local Value Chain and Local Solution. I mean that the World Bank before COVID-19 was suggesting that the local value chain is one of the eminent solutions for the growth. Number 4, ensure that all industrial sector are considered not just high-tech, And this is one of the traps where we have some African countries, when we develop business environment, we think about technology and high tech. And we forgot that the traditional sector who are already making the GDP of the country provide leadership, budget, delegate responsibility and ownership. This is very important to have this leadership, but delegate responsibility that adopt down, but down, I mean, marrying between top down and bottom up, which we have it now, and because people have now more expectations, they are expressing their opinion, we have to consider this. And last point, develop policy that address need of the both businesses and management team. One of the findings of the last two doing business reports about Africa, we don't invest too much in the staff and human resources of the business itself. I mean, now we're facilitating the country, the government is facilitating the access to finance, but some countries don't provide human capital reform, human capital investment in the capital of the enterprises themselves. I hope that by this, I hope I try to summarize some of the major challenges of SMEs in Africa and some solutions, but I focus only in finance as I like finance. Perhaps later on we can have more discussion. Thanks again, and back to you, Mr. Oba.
Thank you very much, Dr. Atif. So moving on to the to our next speaker, we have Ms. Yumisi Morakinyo from Nigeria, who is a supply chain management executive and shipping expert. And after Yumisi, we will have Simon Umegbu, also from Nigeria, who is a senior banking executive and certified trade and payments expert. To all of our panelists, to our leaders, if everyone could please keep their speeches to 10 minutes only, and please watch the clock. We do have 6 leaders to speak today, and we have to end at 2 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time. It is now 8:41 here on the East Coast of the United States. So so Ms. Yumisi, the floor is yours. Please continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll be speaking on how multinationals can help the growth of SMEs in African development. Basic introduction into what small and medium-sized enterprises and SMEs are. These are small and medium-time enterprises, non-affiliated, self-contained businesses with a small workforce. This could range from 2 to 250 employees, as the case may be in different countries. Some countries classify them based on their capital base, while you have banks also classifying them based on turnover. Scaling up has been a huge challenge for the SMEs, and in this day and age, there is an urgent need for multinationals to assist by investing or collaborating with these SMEs. That's the whole essence of this conference, to see how we can help SMEs scale up. What are the, so some of these SMEs, for example, are one of the most important sources of employment in Africa. Taking Nigeria as a case study, the Federal Office of Statistics has said that 97% of all businesses in Nigeria are SMEs, and they make up 50% of the workforce. And this 50% produce the 50% of the country's industrial production. In many sectors, SMEs are claimed to be responsible for driving local innovation and competition. You know, these are the youths. Look at Nigeria as a case study, 200 million Nigerians, and the age of the youth is actually very live here. So what you find is that they are the ones that innovate, they are the taxpayers, they are the ones within the age range that can actually move and shake things within the economy. SMEs have boosted indigenous entrepreneurship, while also acting as a replacement for imported goods and boosting exports. So if these SMEs would definitely use what they have within the economic space to produce the goods that they sell, which would also boost what they can actually export out of the country, which would definitely boost the economy of that particular country. As a result, ensuring the survival of small SMEs is critical for the economic viability of Africa. Moving on to the next slide, it just talks about the business development needs of SMEs. Even though SMEs in Africa receive a lot of attention, they nonetheless face certain significant hurdles that stifle their growth. and prevent them from competing effectively with large corporations. They don't have the might, they don't have the capacity to be able to compete with large organizations. So you find that because of the way these local goods are made, they tend to be more expensive than what if a corporation brings that same goods in country and then sell, or makes that same goods in the country. It is consequently critical to identify and meet this demand to promote their development, and as a result, economic prosperity for Africa. So the key focus areas we're going to be looking at is finance, research and development, trainings, collaboration, mentorship, and infrastructure. This has been broken down here. So finance. Financing businesses is a major challenge faced by SMEs due to non-availability of long-term loans and acceptable collateral and high interest rates. So what you find is a lot of SMEs will struggle with their financing. So what can the multinationals do for them? So this supplier and distributor vendor loans, they can have guaranteed scheme for SMEs to leverage the credit rating of the multinationals. Multinationals will definitely be able to get loans at good rate, would definitely be able to even get long-term loans because of the credibility and how long they have existed, and the fact that they also have the backing of other supporting businesses outside of the country. So with leveraging relationships with multinationals to access foreign term loans at low interest rates. So for instance, within Africa, maybe an SME does not have access to cross-border funding. They can leverage the access that the multinationals have to be able to get these loans at low interest rates, and they can be long-term so that the payment is not stifling the business. Prompt settlements of SME invoices by multinationals. What you find is when multinationals actually have these vendors, suppliers, and distributors, these local ones, there's standard credit payment term of 30 to 90 days payment terms. What this does is it means that these SMEs actually are loaning money to the multinationals. And imagine somebody that has an SME that has a capital base of maybe like 5 million or 10 million loaning money to a business that is worth hundreds and hundreds of millions. Another aspect we can look at is the facilities for research and development. This is unquestionably required for product creation, research into previously untapped areas of SMEs business. So investing in their methods. So you find that if they can, there are better ways of doing research. If the multinationals can actually invest in the methodology that these SMEs use, it will be better for them. They can also build capacity to aid quality control. For instance, what you can sell in some areas cannot be sold internationally in some areas. So it's very important that the multinationals invest so that they can have an understanding of quality control in this case. I'm moving on to my next slide. Training. Training is very key. It forms a good base for these SMEs. Decision making most times is limited to 1 or 2 people, usually the owners, who do not necessarily have the all-round expertise. Therefore, it is expedient that the key decision makers are exposed to training. So you find somebody in banking having to make decisions on supply chain. They will definitely try based on the knowledge that they have, but it cannot be an informed decision making, which may not be the best. So apart from the classroom education, which SMEs owners have received, what can the multinationals do? They can send them for trainings for effective communication, customer service, business development, continuous improvement, project management, financial management, or open access to in-house multinational training schools. So we know that some multinationals have in-house training schools, which they can also open up to their vendors, their suppliers, and let them learn. This would expand their knowledge, and then decision-making will be informed. Also, we have mentoring. You notice that SMEs have limited exposure. They don't have access to information, and they don't know a better way of doing things. So, and also they struggle with attracting and retaining quality hands. So for instance, if somebody were to get a job in a multinational and then get another job, an opportunity also in a one-man business, the tendency to go with a multinational is almost 99.9%. Nobody wants to work with a one-man business, obviously, because you also want the job guarantee, and you also want a better pay, which these SMEs may not be able to afford. Multinationals what the multinationals can do, multinationals should share business specialists with SMEs. They can also provide SMEs to their facilities. They can handhold them to see them succeed and provide grants for staff training, both local and international. This they can also monitor so that what they have provided can be ensured that there is use for the staff that are employed in these farms. Moving on quickly to infrastructure. Unavailability of power, transportation, water, data, and other services that increase cost of production. So SMEs struggle because of this availability. So what can these multinationals do? They can give them access to this data that can help them make quality decisions, which they can make accessible, and they can also encourage full automation of their processes. Where they have generated excess power and other facilities, this can be made available to the SMEs directly at an affordable cost. So, you know, these are already partners with them in some way. So they can make this available to them. They can make them log into it and tap into these opportunities. We have collaboration and partnerships. SMEs do not have an understanding of international market requirements to know how to play. An example is, I was speaking to my brother this morning, and he told me of somebody that saw an opportunity to export yam. Unfortunately, that particular entrepreneur did not have understanding of the type of yam that is being required. So they exported the yam, but it was rejected upon arrival because it was not organically grown. So what can the multinationals do? They can promote SMEs internationally. They can make SMEs aware of different requirements and product standards outside of Africa. They can open them up to international markets, and then also backward integration. So basically, in conclusion, SMEs are critical to a developing country's growth and development. More efforts and methods should be put in place to guarantee that these firms grow to increase employment, improve people's quality of life, alleviate poverty, and boost local and international products. Thank you for your time, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Missy. So moving on to our next, thank you so much for that. Moving on to our next leader, of course, we have Mr. Simon Umego from Nigeria. So without further ado, the floor is yours. And after Simon speaks for about 10 minutes, we will then go to a question and answer session for our first leaders, and then move on to the next 3 leaders. So go ahead, Simon, the floor is yours. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Simon, I did not make it. Simon is not here, so we'll just have to move on and make the best of the time.
Gotcha. Thank you. So I guess we will, we can actually go to the question and answer session then. So for if anyone has any questions, please type that into the panel, and for either Dr. Atef or for UNISMO. Let's take a look here. So we have a question from Dr. Chris Kutz, who's one of our fellow board members and leadership of UNISMO. And really the question focuses on at least both speakers have mentioned the importance of innovation. And UNISMO usefully put this into the context of SMEs. The conversion of innovation into successful business application, intrapreneurship and entrepreneurship, new startup, is the biggest challenge, perhaps one of the biggest challenges facing small enterprises in Africa. So either Dr. Atef or UNISMO, did you want to briefly touch on that, please? Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. I just would like to grab the question well, because I'm sorry, I was confused between reading the question or listening. Sorry, can you repeat exactly the question, please?
So I guess the question is.
It is a comment or question? I guess it is a comment, no? It is not a form of questioning.
It is a comment, but could be used as a question. So I guess the question is towards the very end, in Africa, you know, so I guess here's a question. In Africa, corruption is still a major issue. I know that's a generalized statement, but this is the question. And it stymies government initiatives over and over and over again. I can tell you that serving in State Department, this is a massive problem for us in trying to work with different partners, government and non-government. So how can this be overcome?
Yeah, I can use a straightforward one example, which I already did in Afghanistan, in Kabul. All my gradings with my friends in Kabul currently. That Kabul has created something called iLab. It is an innovation lab where we go for the governmental bodies and we bring, we grab one problem and we do a design thinking lab to solve the problem. So the corruption was the highest. If you ask people in Afghanistan, what is the highest level, highest kind of challenge for the government is corruption. It's 100% corruption. They don't have any other problem than corruption. So the issue was to create kind of mobile apps, and it does exist in India, something similar, where people are taking picture of the all the people are asking them to pay property, and in the administration, things like this. I will summarize by saying that in Africa, we don't have a lot of public innovation, and in universities, if you have a problem like corruption, how to solve the corruption? Corruption, you have a regulatory framework which is not respected, but also you have a common practice. You have a culture practice where people are using their family member, the relationship, you know, this tradition. So the example I mentioned in Afghanistan is already used in India as well, where we try to use the sensitivity of people, particularly young people, to develop some mobile apps where we can take picture photos and you can record immediately the situation where the public servant is asking you for the money. I mean, that's kind of let's say the crowd solution for the problem. That the problem in the African continent regard the corruption is a problem which comes from long time before. It has kind of culture background, a non-matured regulatory frame. I mentioned the central banks are not yet using this regulatory sandbox, which has about 15 years in some other continent. So perhaps the innovation will come up to bring young people with young solution, and particularly dealing with chronic problem like corruption. I don't suggest to have more laws, more regulatory, because we have already in place the regulation and law which are not respected. Perhaps we have to shift little to use the crowd, the people themselves, people who are the owner of business, the crowd people, the young students who might be making a peer pressure on the governments and the regulatory. I use the idea in Afghanistan that they created this mobile app where people, anyone, once some public servant has required money from you, you just take a picture or a record, and it goes for a website and it goes viral, and they measure the efficiency of this within 2 years, that people are really starting to feel that kind of resistance to corruption. I mean, that's an issue, but I don't have a magic stick. But let's say that we didn't use the crowd force in Africa. We are always waiting for the top-down solution. But public innovation, social innovation, and this kind of regulatory sandbox, innovation sandbox are coming up to bring people into the social problem. One of the major social problem in the worldwide, you know, currently is a corruption, because corruption is a worldwide problem. It's not only proper for Africa, but it has had kind of prosperity in Africa due to a lot of parameters and factors we know. So my personal reply will be to use more innovation sandbox, more kind of crowd innovation where people will come up with solution, and that kind of auto control certainly will lower the pressure in the corruption. So back to you, Adam.
Thank you. Yumisi, did you want to, we have a direct question for you as well, but would you like to comment on that as well? That question, please.
All right, thank you very much, Adam. Okay, so the basic thing with multinationals is that you find that they are very, very interested in corruption, in the sense that you cannot work with a multinational and have anything that has to do with corruption. You would sign all forms to say that you do not carry out any form of corrupt practices in your organization. So I believe it's a gradual process that we will get there. It may take time, but what you are finding out is that even those that are corrupt now are getting tired of that corruption. It's no longer interesting to continue to stay in corruption, because it only makes things get bad. So what SMEs and these SMEs, they want to grow, they want to continue to partner with multinationals. So what you find is that they also try to move away from corruption. They try to commit to this growth, and that's what you find out there. But it's not a journey of one day. It's a growth process. So what would happen is there is continuous education, continuous training, continuous putting it out there that this is how we can get better. This is how the economy can get better. And I believe that's how we will be able to achieve the dreams that we want.
Amen. You may see there is actually one question directly to you, and then I will go on to our next sort of half of the session, please. So the question is, this is in chat, but the question for you, Missy, is how can training be a competitive edge to grow SMEs, businesses, and make them a major contributor to the economy?
Okay, thank you so much. Sorry, please, can you take that again? I think I mixed it up.
Yes, so how can training be a competitive edge to grow SMEs,
Okay.
SME businesses, and make them perhaps a more major contributor to the economy?
Thank you. So let's look at financial trainings, for instance. For a business, an IT expert, someone that develops technological devices and all that, probably doesn't have any idea of how finances should be run and just only wants to develop the software. And then you find that, yes, he develops a good software, but that business is not able to thrive because he doesn't have the technical know-how of how financing should operate, or how he can get the business, or how his HR should run. So when he has training, he will definitely not be the one running this other department, but it gives him an idea of how to manage that department to make sure that it gives the right result at the right time, which will then be used in his organization to attract the kind of businesses that he wants to be able to deliver on the promises. So basically, giving training for somebody like me, I don't know much about business, but I've had trainings from my brother, who happens to be a business owner and also formerly a banker, but he also tends to leverage me for supply chain. Ask me question on supply chain. So what you find is these trainings would expose these SMEs to advantages that they probably wouldn't have access to. And from there, they can build the type of result that they want. I hope this answers the question.
Thank you very much. So Fendi, the second half of the conference, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Adam. We're having a very productive conference so far. Once again, I'd like to welcome all the panelists and all the attendees. They're very welcome. This conference is a timely one, I believe. In the course of the last couple of years, we have seen a lot of changes to the business landscape, not just in the Sub-Saharan continent, but the world over. There have been changes in the way people do business, and we've seen the numbers, we've seen the indices. A lot of businesses have gone down. A lot of businesses have been forced to modify or abandon popular practices and look for new ways to service their customers and stay afloat. And that is one of the reasons why the organizers of this conference at UNISMO decided that we need to have an open forum, a conference where people can come and share ideas, listen to experts, talk to leaders, get some solutions that they can apply to their own businesses going forward. Now we are going to hear from Mr. Adeolu Akinyemi, who is an entrepreneur. He's a consultant. He has gone around the business landscape. He has done a number of things, and I believe that his own experience in this conference will be very, very useful to those people who are attending, people who have logged in. I would like you guys to please, as you listen, we'll make sure that the conference itself is recorded and is put out there. We'll stream it live. But as you listen, please take notes, jot down your questions. We'll take as many of them as we can within the time allocated, and we'll try and answer them. And Mr. Adeolu Akinyemi, the floor is yours. Thank you once again, Yemisi. You did wonderfully well. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Atef. I love your presentation. I'm looking forward to reading your slides. So, Mr. Adeolu Akinyemi, please, you have the floor. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Uba, and thank you very much, everyone. I understand that I have 10 minutes, so I will just do just that. So whatever it is that I stop, that's where I'm going to stop. So we're talking, I think most of the talk has been done already around the challenges that businesses face in Africa. I think what we need and where the questions will come from is how do we solve them? And I want to do this, very simply and very practically because of the time that we have. And I want to say that, so I'm an entrepreneur. I've been involved in a number of businesses. So I'll just give you a quick overview of what I've done. I'm involved in manufacturing. There's a number of products we produce. The range of products they're produced here in Africa and they're sold in Nigeria, a few other African countries around the world. We into financial services, into distribution, into real estate. In financial services is an app called BitNob that I'm involved in driving, and then distribution and a few other things. Now, one of the things I would like to tell you is, there are challenges that we face, and they are not ideas in our minds, they are real challenges. Okay, and these challenges are varied as the initial speakers have shared with us. We have problems, from corruption. We have problems with infrastructure. We have problems with funding. We have problems with a variety of things. And before I go reeling a few of these problems, I want to just quickly identify some ideas for solutions. So I hold the paradigm that wealth, W, I have a small formula I use. I call it W equals to KVN. W stands for wealth, V stands for value, N stands for the number of people the value is added to, and K is what you call the coefficient of perception. I call it the coefficient of perception. Basically saying that wealth is created when problems are solved. If you can solve problems for a large number of people, that's how wealth is created. And how your value is perceived goes a long way to explain or make it clear to you whether you are solving good problems or problems that can make you wealthy or not. Now, so this is how wealth is created. And I dare say that the reason why Africa is a very viable space for business is because we have loads of problems. And we will solve some problems, we will come up with ideas, but somehow every solution will also still create new problems as well. There's not going to be a time when we will get into the mix and we'll say we are completely problem-free. Okay, there will always be problems. I was sharing with some people day before yesterday that life is a sequence of problem-solving exercises. And as soon as you solve one, other ones pop up as well. But value is about problem-solving. And the only way we can solve problems is by thinking and being creative, applying innovation. So I'm going to mention a few of the problems and I'm going to tell you ideas of how, for example, I have been able to solve it, what I have done, what you can do, other options you can consider. Basically take you on this very short journey of how these problems in Africa exist and what we can do about them. Now, of course, the list of problems isn't exhaustive. I like what the first speaker spoke about and showed us World Bank's view, showed us the entrepreneurial view, showed us the surveys. So I don't need to go through that again. I've edited that out of my own conversation. To say we can come up with a plethora of examples of challenges that Dr. Atef mentioned. Okay, but the reality is solving them will require is the value activity that makes us be in business in the first place. So our businesses solve a problem, and there are businesses around there are problems around our business that we also need to solve as well. And the way to solve them is by thinking and applying innovation and knowing that every time we're able to solve a problem, we're actually creating an opportunity to create further wealth. So let's go for a few examples. One of the biggest challenges that enters into the top 5 in everybody's consideration is funding. Okay, if you go for a seminar and you ask people, Why are you not doing the business of your dreams? They'll say, I don't have money. I don't have enough money. Okay. And it's a problem. It's a real problem. Okay. So why don't they have money? Because the cost of funding is high. Okay. So in Africa, and where I live in Nigeria, for example, interest rates from banks, is as high as 24% per annum at conventional banks, and with microfinance banks can be as high as 60% per annum. These are ridiculous rates, okay, of what cost of funds are. And the requirement for funding, typically you are expected to bring either, the burial ground site of your grandmother, and basically things that are totally unreachable for you if you want to start a business. Now, these problems are real. How do we solve them? Of course, number one of the things that we are learning to do, which we've been implementing, is restructuring our businesses to be venture-backed. Okay, basically making sure that we don't want to own all of the company. We want to be able to have a structure that says we are willing, to have venture capitals, buy equity in our businesses, offer debt to our businesses. We're beginning to do venture-backed businesses, basically structuring to ensure that we will not have ownership, for the next 25 years. We're going to have some ownership. We're willing to allow others to participate in what we're doing as it begins to have traction and make sense. Another thing you can do is crowdfunding. And I slash that with spontaneous financing, because sometimes you are able to get the crowd to back an idea because there is a stake they can have in it as well. You find a lot of this in real estate where the land is bought, okay, but people begin to buy the properties pre-development, okay, and you basically set up timelines for them to say you pay this amount before foundation, you pay this amount when foundation is done, you pay this amount when we get to lintel level, you pay this amount when we roof, you pay this time before the keys are delivered to you. Basically, you're using the money of the crowd to finance your establishment as well. Or you can have what you call spontaneous financing, which is basically selling the products ahead of their delivery, making sure that the money comes in, okay, 30 days, 20 days, 15 days before product delivery, and then using their money to be able to service them and then creating profit from that, called spontaneous financing. This is what you want to do. Or 3, spend out time, spend time understanding the language of the local banks that you have around you, which basically means, every banking system in every country has a language they speak. There's what they're looking for. So, for example, in Nigeria banks, what they're looking for is assets that have certificate of occupancy. Okay, document that's land that is verified and has data showing that this property belongs to this person in the official documents, and that kind of property is something that can be backed. Now, of course, land alone is not good. Alone is not good in Nigeria. You need to build something there. So even if you have land in very, very good area, the language of the banking system here says put a small structure there. Even if it's a small structure, it will radically improve the value of that property. That can now become collateral for you to drive a business that is functioning in that environment or in another environment. So you basically want to learn work with bankers, meet with people that have been there, have seniority. They know what it takes to take money from their systems. And if you understand their language, it may be something that you're able to access. So funding is a very, very big issue. These are some of the ideas we have used to do it. I've done spontaneous financing a number of times. I've managed a business that is venture backed. Okay, I've done loans from banks before, using, buying a real estate that has certificate of occupancy, has those details, and using it to finance the operations, that is running in that particular factory. So these are things that have been done before, and there are things you can do as well. Okay, another very big problem we have in Africa is inconsistency of government policies. Okay, sometimes these policies are just unfriendly for business. So 1 minute, the CBN governor comes out and says BDCs, no more licenses, doesn't make any sense. All licenses disrupted, this doesn't work anymore. And that means it says, okay, cryptocurrency, the banks should not deal with them. We're trying to understand a few things. And, there's so many policies that go on there that you're not clear about what's going on. You need to get a banking license. You want to run a bank, you have to have, morbid amounts of resources before you can start. You want to do something in financial services, it's just crazy. Sometimes it's outright bans, sometimes it's unclear policies, and sometimes at the base of it, high cost values are caused by corruption, because you want to meet with somebody in government who is able to help you facilitate certain things. They tell you have to pay these fees and pay that fees before you can see this person. There's a lot going on. I like the verse that says the reason why there's corruption in land is because there's high official after high official who are looking for their own ends. Now, these are real issues. How do we solve these issues? Okay, one of the ways I've found is form associations. Okay, you want to create a pressure group that can basically get the attention of government. You can form associations, you are bigger together. 1 can chase 1,000, 2 can put 10,000 to flight. We are bigger and stronger together. The the sum of the people is bigger than the individual parts. So you want to join an association and become a pressure group that begins to at least say, this is the right thing to do. This is what we expect. You want to engage, okay? You're not going to solve any problems that has to do with government inconsistencies by staying afar. You want to engage. So you want to increase your capacity to engage, continue to write, continue to speak, continue to have a platform that communicates so that you're an authority in the things that you want to address. I think that's very important. Also, you may want to reset your boundaries. So for me, one of the things I have done for a long time is I, as a policy, refrain from doing businesses that allow me to play within the government space of having to require government, self-government, and do those kind of things, because I don't want to get my hands stained. Now, of course, that's not something that we all can do. So you have to either do number one, number two. And if you can't do them very well, then reset your boundaries and take only businesses that allow you to engage with solving problems at the level where the government doesn't become a stumbling block for you. And I like what Dr. Arif said. I think that's Dr. Atef. I think that's a very good point. Creating solutions that allow for public shaming, that allow for publicly showing pictures and showing what happened, getting them popular for the wrong things. Public shaming can be a deterrent to corrupt practices and people that want to basically intervene in your business and mess things up. Okay, there are more problems. Like I said, I intend to stick to the time. So I think I have 2 minutes more and I'm watching it. Enabling environments. So one of the key things that, that basically, cripples business for Africans is infrastructure. So, and I tell people the most expensive hotels in the world are here in Nigeria. And why? Not because they're the best hotels in the world, but because every time you are sleeping in a hotel in Nigeria, 40% of the cost of that comfort is power. Okay, there's diesel running in the engine to keep the lights on because the national grid is not supplying as much light to that hotel. So there's a lot of cost. Every food you eat in that hotel is being powered by energy. Energy is responsible for 40% extra costs, in running some of these enterprises. So infrastructure, you want to transport your goods from place to place. The roads are what they are. Okay, the rails, thank God, they're beginning to crank into operation, for example, inside of environment. So infrastructure, expertise, technology, these are things you find causing the environment not to be enabling. What is the solution? Okay, the solutions are inherent in them as well. It means we need to create our own infrastructure. Everybody who wants to do business needs to begin to think like a leader. Of course, one day, we're going to, and I think the policy as well is a problem that needs to be solved, but that's a matter for another day. But what we need to begin to do is, take total ownership of the space in which we are doing business, begin to realize that we are going to own our own infrastructure. We're going to ensure that we can create expertise by providing training, by providing access to experience and technology to the people within our teams to ensure that we can, at least create for ourselves a microcosm of an enabling environment, even though it's not available around there. So my own perspective is we don't complain about what the country can do or the continent cannot do for us. We ask ourselves where we find ourselves today, what exactly can we begin to do to ensure that we can begin to spread the environment we want to have from where we are and begin to increase our ecosystem. And I think a few companies have been able to do that in this market. So you, for example, find a lot of developers were created by Andela. A lot of Andela developers are created by the Paystacks of this world, the Flutters of this world, that become available as they grow. They can admit more. And those will become viable experiences to go and join other startups and become a part of other things that are getting started as well. So enable environment, staff, okay? Because of the nature of our environment, there's a lot of young people in Africa. If you look at population trends, Africa will become humongous in the future because we are building an army of young people who are unfortunately unskilled, uneducated. So one of the key things that we need to begin to do is we can't play with this. We need to continue to ensure that we ourselves are skilled and we are, creating the cultures around our businesses of developing people, not only for the sake of our businesses, but for the sake of the future of the economy, the spaces that we find ourselves in. We need to begin to help people, gain experience, learn, give them access to where they can volunteer. There should be a big drive towards competence development and gathering sufficient experience that can be, utilized for the future in driving businesses. I'm going to stop with this, market access. Okay, so one of the most frustrating things I've found, for example, is it's probably cheaper to move products to some places outside Africa than inside Africa. So as one continent, you want to intertrade. You want to send stuff to Ghana. It's unbelievable the kind of hurdles you need to go through to send something to a country that is just near you, a country that you probably can go to overnight. Okay, but the cost of moving things there because of these barriers, is just huge. And I think this platform provides opportunities for us to be able to network across countries, network across regions, and be able to say, what that thing you're doing there, I would like to gain access here. And I think how we have been able to solve it so far is, yes, it's come at those costs, and we're basically transferring those costs to our customers. But of course, it starts from knowing somebody in the other country, establishing some trust relationships, and then we can begin to have some inter-Africa trade, pending when our governments are able to ensure that, we can be talking Euro like Europe. We can be talking Africa and understand that we don't need those visa limitations in traveling to each other's country. We don't need those, we don't need to re-register products that have been registered in other West African countries, While those conversations are going on, it can begin with trust, relationships amongst people who connect with themselves on certain networks. And of course, infrastructure bottlenecks also create market access within local frameworks. So these are a few examples of problems that I see in our environment. These are the ways we have been able to manage them. I think if we all think this way and think, how can I solve the problem? Value is problem solving. Value solutions what creates wealth. If we all think this way, then every problem will be seen in the right perspective, and we can play our own roles to ensure that we overcome some of these challenges and do good business in Africa. Thank you.
Lovely. Very lovely. Thank you very much, Adeola Akinyemi. That was very straight to the point, very concise, very clear. We're moving on now. Hold on, let me share my screen very briefly so that I can let you see where we are in the program. We have heard so far, we have heard from Dr. Atef, we've heard from Yebisi, we've heard from Adeola Akinyemi. Next up, we are going to hear from Mr. Joe Deswat. He's the director at Ubuntu Agriculture. He's also a business creation expert, and we included him on this panel just for that reason. When you see people who have done it and have gotten it right and are also helping create businesses in a particular region, you reach out to them and ask them, please come and give us some of your formula. Let us work with it and we can achieve some level of success. So, Mr. Joe, I am going to give you the floor right now. Please, let's try to keep within time so we can answer as many questions as possible. Thank you.
Let me just try and share my screen here. Right. Hopefully you can. Can you share my? Is that the wrong? Seeing the wrong thing here. Excuse me for a second. Let me just stop sharing. Do it like this. There we go. Right. So what we at Ubuntu do is, we try to tackle two areas of work. The first is looking at the urban context, where we do affordable housing and settlement programs. And then the second part that what we do is a kind of agricultural intervention along a productive value chain. So I'm going to talk more around the agricultural side because of the topic that was assigned to me to really look at the effect of COVID-19 on the MSMEs and to really look what is the way forward. So I think the first thing to understand is that MSMEs sectors across the continent of Africa is literally mostly agricultural. 60% of Africans work in agriculture, and about 55% of that would be women. And that's a very good figure because in Latin America, for instance, you look at the women's participation in agriculture is about 35%. So there's a good foundation to move forward on. I once sat in a meeting with the Minister of Agriculture in Kenya, and we were talking around local economic development and all the various issues that we have to face. And he said to me, listen, let's be realistic. You're not going to drive a Kenyan car. You're also not going to watch TV on a Kenyan TV. You probably won't use a Kenyan designed and built kind of like Apple-like computer. You won't cook on a Kenyan stove, or play anything based on a Kenyan product. But what you will be doing is you will be consuming Kenyan produce. That I can tell you as a guarantee. So I kind of think, that was, for me, very succinct summary of so much of the future in this global context for Africa is really based on what it's the success it makes on the field in agriculture. And if you look at just the geography, 60% of all the world's arable land actually sits in Africa. But yet, 20% of all the food consumed is still imported. And 65% of this land that is under use is currently degraded. So even before or after COVID, we as Ubuntu really see the challenge to be the following 5 things. The first thing is to really, really organize. Organization, Barack Obama had a fantastic kind of saying where he said, Africa doesn't need new and big charismatic leaders, it needs institutions. And those institutions need to be designed, they need to be built, they need to be invested in. And what I mean with those institutions, they are non-government, they're private sector, they're commercial, they're for profit, to get off the kind of tendency to do innovation through NGOs. And critically, they should be investable. And if you look at the agricultural sector at the moment, 90% of the producers, if not more, are micro. These are people that are farming 1 or 2 acres, and that needs to reduce down to 30% of the sector. Small agricultural developers are around 5% of the market, and that needs to grow to about 35%. Emergent, and this is farmers that are doing 50 to 60 to 100 hectares or acres, or either way, it's sufficient. At the moment, it's about 3%, and that needs to grow to about 25%. And commercial farming at the moment is less than 1% and needs to grow to about 10%. The issues you face with, and this is the kind of basic, where I think in almost any sector, you see these kind of trends, that basically the underlying structure for business is very discordant. What I mean is disconnected. It's self-defeating. Sometimes it's its own worst enemy. And an organization can help get rid of this discordancy. The second thing is very, very fractured. People's levels of trust and collaboration and co-working is incredibly low. If I do a stereotypical kind of perception from my view, if I'm really honest, I think that many people across Africa are very despondent, very distrustful, have heard it all, have been promised it all, feel dejected. And so something to reestablish trust so that people can collaborate with greater sets of confidence is really important. I think the other issue around why organization is really important is so much of the economy happens informally. It's informal taxis, informal lending, informal agricultural production, informal housing, slums. This informal nature is incredibly exploitable. You can exploit it. You can put the tentacles of corruption in on it. It has a very low power to resist those kind of exploitations. It has very low influence, and it tends to be a price taker. It cannot exert price on issues. So on the discordancy issue around organization, self-defeating, fractured, any kind of fractured situation of a value chain is not scalable, and any informal type of where everybody does what is right in their own eyes or work according to their own intentions is not aggregatable. You cannot aggregate it and create mass. And so what we do is we create these agri-hubs, and the agri-hubs have underneath them these agri-nodes. An agri-node is simply taking a geographic area and getting all of the people from small to medium to emergent to large commercial to start working more like a Toyota value chain. In a Toyota production value chain is you have a small family business that puts in a little bit of ball bearings into something that then they pass to the next SME business that fits it into some kind of a gearbox that passes it on to Toyota that assembles it all into a car. And one needs to look at developing these value chains into a productive alliance where every producer type is included and knows what role they are playing. They're playing part of a holistic framework. And you need an institution to build those things. You need to bring, do all the intermediation between relationships and together so that a productive alliance can happen. The second aspect here is capacity and capability. I don't really need to kind of talk too much around this because the previous speakers have very eloquently talked around this, but you know, I guess the breakdown for us is individual skills. You know, skills levels are terrifically low. And particularly in the agricultural thing, there's a real opportunity now in Africa to actually do this leapfrog of a paradigm that's very prominent in agriculture, global agricultural production, to leapfrog straight into what I think will be the next big thing in agriculture. And this leapfrogging is literally, we can sideskip the big industrial agricultural machine that we see in the US as a kind of example. You know, the US uses a lot of genetic seed. It is kind of very high input agriculture, lots of equipment, genetic seeds, and all those kind of operations. And the result of that is the slow dying of the soil, and the death of the soil, and the massive kind of salt formation in the soils, and a spread of kind of toxicity all along the rivers into kind of the Gulf of Mexico. And it's been kind of recorded that this post-World War fertilizer type of agriculture really has come to the end of where it should be going. And we see also, again, if I refer to the States, because where the problem is, the solution comes forward, you see this growth of regenerative agriculture as a kind of new way to handle the soil that is on every single research thing done, beating the industrial agriculture hands over. Africa can move straight into that because importing things like fertilizers, expensive second-hand equipment, or the flood of cheap, non-reliable farming equipment, none of these things are really helpful. So one can really skip a generation and go into soil-friendly, where you work with the bacteria and multi-species and all the rest of it, to step change straight into the kind of food production which I think is the future food production. And that has, of course, a multiple kind of positive effects in terms of global climate change, water retention, stopping floods, carbon capture in the soil, and a whole bunch of other things. We work very closely with some of the leading lights in Australia along this, and it's been a complete revelation of just how successful this is and how applicable this is. Also, clearly, in terms of capacity, when you're a poor farmer, what happens is your bigger livestock tend to die off every time there's a drought. So you have the kind of genetic losses year on year on year. And it needs a genetic breeding injection of fresh and better stock. Use this very resilient kind of cattle that you've got, and put cattle that do kind of grass conversion to meat better. And the same is with seed in your cereals and your vegetable production crops. So more resilient stock can be enhanced by conversion. Then if one looks at the next step, which is infrastructure, only about 0.1% of the land is irrigated. You know, there's huge water resources, lakes and other things that are available, and irrigation yet has really not taken off. And that's because it's expensive, and it needs some kind of institution to start investing and helping that to happen. Equipment, you know, I've mentioned equipment earlier, but there's a host of cheap, unreliable, unserviceable, and inefficient equipment flooding in, particularly from the east. This is not helpful. Having broken tractors, a sea of broken tractors all over the place, doesn't help anybody. We need a more reliant kind of, a more consolidated situation. And I kind of, in my own, you know, this is controversial, but my own thoughts are, in the UK here, we have two kinds of supermarkets. The one is a very discount-orientated one where you can buy one toothpaste. They've got their own brand of toothpaste, and that's what you buy. There isn't 20,000 different types of toothpaste. So I kind of think one should have less choice and more consolidation. So the product support, all of the spare parts, the support, the kind of knowledge of how to operate and fix the machinery can happen. And again, that can be done through an institution if your financial incentives to the farmers are more limited. So that if we just try and do a comparison, the per person value addition in agriculture in Africa is 2.1. That means every person working agriculture creates 2.1 points of value. Now, if you compare this to 28, one person creating 28 value points in the developing world, we see there's an enormous potential to grow. And the capacity and capability issues being addressed has huge headroom to grow into. It's not anywhere far from exhausted in what it can do. The effect of low productivity in the 60% of the globe's arable land and with only 16% of the global population, unfortunately is not coming through. If you've got 60% of the world's arable land and only 16% of the world's population, Africa should be feeding the Middle East, it should be feeding Russia and some of the cold climate countries, it should be able to kind of take food into China and Japan and countries that are massively populated and possibly struggle to have all of the right kind of food inputs. So food, 20% of the food is still important, which is 35 billion. This has grown by 60% in the last 5 years and is going to reach 110 billion by 2025. And then by 20 years later to $265 billion of food importation. Imagine if $265 billion becomes available to be used for other things. So food and food production is absolutely critical. Now, if you take that to a per population thing, that is $185 per person per annum. And that's going to grow to $1,000 per person per annum. So if you've got a household of 5 people, set yourself ready to start paying $5,000 a year as a household to import food. Now that to me is crazy. It's nuts. It should be turned around. It comes to capital now. Dr. Ashabrari kind of talked so eloquently around capital, but just to try and have a little look and see what's going on there is less than 4% of government spending goes into agriculture. Now this is 60% of the economy, right? But only 4% of government spending goes into agriculture. 4% of all the financial institutions, this is banks, microfinance organizations, insurances, all the rest of it, 4% of its money goes into agriculture. So, what we have also is that less than 10% of farmers have access to any version of capital. The people that have access to capital, they tend to have access to capital from suppliers. So this is like getting trade credit from your fertilizer company. And that sits at 35 to 40% interest per annum. It's hugely expensive. So, just a more elegant solution can be found there. And at the moment, less than 12.5% of the agriculture sector has any version of capital. The sector size at the moment is $1.75 trillion per annum, but the growth in demand outstrips the growth in supply by tenfold. So it's a tenfold outstripping. And the potential market, therefore, if you look at the gap between what the government and the financial institutions currently are funding, there's a 1.5 trillion immediate gap for capital. If you think of it, there's $65 trillion in impact investment available globally. 1.5 trillion is not a big ask, but it's not attractive because the way that we structure agriculture, the pitch decks, the thinking around the financial structure is absolutely terrible and it needs to be improved. If we're very, very generous, this is me at my most generous, right? I'd say there is maybe 10 agricultural venture capital investors on the continent. And if I'm super generous, I'd say they've got maybe $1 billion, $1.5 billion. This is 0.007% of the market demand. 0.007%. It has such an enormous gap for investment Capital should be flowing in here. We have looked at the profitability. You can sustain profitability between 15 and 25% per annum easily for an investor. And if you then think of it this way, you know, we always think that Africa receives a lot of aid. For every $1 of aid that flows into the continent, $10 flow out from people that have no confidence in their government, no confidence in the economy, are taking their profits to invest it elsewhere. If we can just reverse this outflow, this leakage of money, this $10 per dollar of aid coming in, by creating a deal ticket that is attractive, that is secure, we could turn this whole thing around and actually get rid of the need for aid, by and large. I'm a fan of aid, but I'm not a big fan of aid, to put it that way, right? Number D is looking at the market development. If you think of it, if you go to a supermarket in many African countries and you try to buy meat, you just get offered meat. There's no good quality meat or poor quality meat. It's meat. Meat is sold to you by kilogram, and no distinction of whether you're eating a 15-year-old cow that some guy has been herding for 1,000 kilometers over its lifespan, or whether you're eating a prime beef steak. There's no differentiation whatsoever. So just creating differentiation will create different levels of prices, different levels of pricing would create more profit, and more profit will create more young people wanting to stay in agriculture. But also, Africa's urbanizing. You know, at the moment, 50% of the population is urbanized, and in a few years, it's going to be 66%. When people move from the countryside to the urban thing, they want more protein. They start buying more protein. You stop eating maize and maize flour and start eating chicken and fish and beef and mutton. So there's that transformation. We need an institution that can actively educate the consumer and can actually bring this market differentiation. This will not happen in chaos. It will not happen in informality. It needs to be intentional, it needs to be built. If we look at export, the reason why so little food is being exported, you look at the food being exported, it's kind of things like coffee, tea, things like that. I remember the years when I first started going to, let's pick on Kenya again. In early days when I came to Kenya, I never met a Kenyan that drank coffee. That's changed now, but you had a produce that actually wasn't locally consumed. So wastage factors, 40 to 60% of the crops are wasted, mostly before it leaves the farm gate. So the last point here is the sector scaffolding and supports. This is what the World Bank calls intangible wealth. It's a fantastic concept. I really encourage you to Google it. But it basically is a study that World Bank did, and they said a Mexican moving from Mexico to America is 5 times more productive immediately. Why? Because the system, the ecosystem they move into is more productive. It means there's more bank supports, there's insurance, there's all sorts of stuff that's possible. We need to build greater intangible wealth in Africa. And I think it boils down to trust, to respect of property rights, and to create rules. There has to be rules. Everybody cannot do what's right in their own eyes. There has to be rules. And to get those kind of things in place, you need institutions. I'm on my last slide now. Now let me answer the question. What is the impact of COVID? So obviously the first thing is COVID is not a joke. It's tragic. I think every life lost is absolutely tragic. I've been affected, I've lost family members, and it is horrendous, you know. So first thing is deepest empathy and sympathy towards human loss. There's also chaos and disruption that we've seen on an unprecedented scale, right? And that is self-evident. I don't need to explain it. What I want to explain is I think it creates a strategic fog. COVID becomes the fog in the room. It takes our attention away. We can't see those long-term objectives because we've got a short-term problem. And it somehow can dislocate us from the longer term, you know, building stuff for 100 years, building institutions over 100 years that are strong, building sectors and marketplaces over 50 years. The COVID will come and go. It's not here. We are conquering it, you know. So the fact is, an interim process is going to create a lot of fog. is going to compete for resources, and we'll see resource losses. We're going to have a lot of conferences and five-star hotels with big buffets eating a lot of money, doing workshops on COVID and post-COVID effects, creating volumes of paperwork. And my prediction is by the time all the solutions come in, COVID will be history. So it's a real noise factor. What is on the positive side, what I think it brings is all of us are more worried about our health and our immunity. The food that can be produced in Africa can help the human body increase its own immunity by a big factor. The science is very fresh on this, so I don't want to quote figures, but there's very, very, very clear parallel indications that eating industrial food with maybe a BRIC score of about 2 to 3 versus eating regenerative food with a BRIC score of 18 to 19 means that your body gets an inoculation of a whole lot of the plants and foods' own disease resistance that's not being utilized. Eating stress foods leaves a stressed body. Eating relaxed and de-stressed and unchallenged food from a healthy kind of biodiverse biome really makes for a healthier human being. And this is the advantage that we've got. So thank you very much for listening, and I really appreciate your patience.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Joe. We're really pressed for time, so we're going to go straight to the last speaker for this particular conference. Mr. Obiora and women, thank you very much for holding on. Thank you for your patience. I'm going to give the floor to you. Please, let's have your presentation right now. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Oba. I would attempt to make this really quick and smart. So essentially, I'll be speaking to how WTO essentially can help empower SMEs, specifically those operating in the agricultural sector. Thankfully, most of my job has actually been done, especially with the last speaker, Mr. Joe Deswa. Thank you so much. I particularly enjoyed your presentation. So I think what is important for me here, even as we begin to speak about empowering the SMEs, is to first understand that the overall aim for the World Trade Organization is to establish, a fairer trading system that will essentially increase market access and, more importantly here, improve the livelihoods of farmers around the world. And case in point here is Nigeria, or Africa as it were, where you have more than 80% of the farmers in Nigeria here being smallholder farmers. So what that simply tells us is that for most of our food produce we consume here, they come from farms that are less than 10 hectares of land. And this is a big chunk when you also understand that 60% of the population actually work in this sector. To give us, or to add a bit of context to what the country fact file or the country profile is in Nigeria, I fear it will be important to share with us just quickly some of what the data says or how it supports the situation in Nigeria here. As at the last CBN Q1 report, agriculture contributed significantly to the economy, about 22.35. This is way ahead of trade, information, manufacturing, and even crude oil, petrol and natural gas. And one of the reasons you could attribute to this, is the falling oil prices that continue to decline in government revenues. So you see again that agriculture, once again, will still remain a big playing part to ensuring that the economies of nations in Africa are viable. And one other interesting thing about the fact file for Africa, or Nigeria to be precise, is we're a pretty young country. Over 202 million persons, and then you have about 65% of that number below 30 years. Earlier this week, I know we celebrated the World Youth Day, and I felt it was a profound time to actually also try and get most of our youths back into the farms. I would, in the course of the presentation, share with you some of the challenges, giving specific examples of some of the hindrances why this may take a while. But it's important here for us to note that food insecurity is becoming a real issue here. We're about 67% as of last year. And of course, rising inflation with food currently sits in double digits, almost 21%. And this again brings us to the fact that all our efforts at this point, especially for some of us working in the development and humanitarian field, will be to see how we can drive interest, back to the farm, especially for the young ones. So specifically, I will give very specific direct examples on how some of this, how some of the SMEs in agricultural space can be empowered or supported. Yemi C in her presentation spoke a lot about trading, which is something I think most of our SMEs and smallholder farmers would benefit from. Supporting them in terms of building trade capacity as well as development will be key. And I will share two key scenarios here. Where my team and I have in the northwest of Nigeria has the opportunity to have worked with about 5,000 farmers that actually grow specifically grains in northwest Nigeria. And it was interesting to note that most of them still rely on their traditional methods for drying grains. And this actually, I mean, like the picture shows, where they dry some of the grains at the roadside, and this by itself will also increase the risk of contamination of these grains, which by itself also will reduce how competitive their produce will be, even to sell to even multinationals or even some of the other African countries here. So what we found that will be useful here is try to build that capacity to adopt newer drying methods. And one of the very simple things we found that worked for them was to introduce solar dryers. And this has proven to reduce moisture content of their grains to less than 13% in 1 day, as against the 30 days of traditional buka methods that they use. So again, like I said, support capacity training, capacity building is something that we cannot, I mean, this is something that cannot be overstated again and again. Another case scenario would be how how farmers, especially those in the dairy sector in Nigeria, the pastoralists here, could actually benefit from improved training as regards increasing their milk capacity for their milk. Now, traditionally, the average cows that we have here within Nigeria, usually, I mean, when you express them for milk, will get between 3 to 4 liters per day, because usually these cows are bred for their meat, for purposes for meat, not necessarily for milk. But also in supporting them and introducing them to newer ways of increasing milk production through artificial insemination. We've seen where this has worked in countries like Kenya and also India. You find out that this would also, to a large extent, help improve and boost the milk volume to about 40 liters per day. And currently, we know that the government of Nigeria has initiated what we call the National Livestock Transformation Plan. Albeit it's still slow in gaining traction, because we know a few states have started adopting it. And one of the benefits of this, when it fully kicks off, would also be to encourage ranching. And this would go a long way in reducing some of the incidents of the push and pull conflict between farmers and herders we have in certain parts of the north. Then one other key part we think smallholder farmers would benefit a lot would be financial inclusion. It would shock us to know that most smallholder farmers do not even have as simple as bank account numbers. So where you talk about access to finance, I mean, I think it would be important to go back to find out how many of them understand how they can actually access some of these finances. A few of them have groups in terms of farmer groups or aggregator groups, because when they come as groups, they're also able to access some of this finance. But one other part we believe will be important in also building their capacity will be around financial inclusion, because this has shown to be a prerequisite to helping them access some of these funds that they seek to expand and scale up on their business. And of course, we can't, I mean, COVID, it's been a traumatizing past 19, 20 months with COVID. And it was pleasant to hear during the WTO's address by the DG of WTO, Professor Ngozi Weller, where she specifically said it would be important to drive equitable vaccine rollout to developing countries. And we can't agree less with this, because this would have a major impact on smallholder farmers, because with vaccines, currently Nigeria stands at about 1.1 million of the population has been vaccinated, which is less than the 15.5% population of 15.5% of the global vaccinated world population. So we think this also will be another means we can actually get them, provide them a bigger canvas to operate in. In some parts also, we still have few places within the Northwest and Northeast where there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of sensitizing them on even the dangers of COVID. because we've in the course of past 18 months, we've had cases where farmers have been reluctant to even have, as they call it, visitors, those of us from the city centers coming to support their work any close to them, because they believe that we are the ones carrying some of these diseases. So I think a lot still has to be done here in terms of, apart from access to COVID-19 vaccines, to actually sensitize them on the dangers of what the pandemic and what COVID is all about. And then importantly is climate change technology. Again, we've seen the past few years that, with massive flooding and flash flood, as well as abnormal rainfall patterns, this has caused massive loss of harvest produce in the farms. We know from works we've done in smaller areas in the Northwest where climate change technology has been introduced to farmers, and in simple form, where they can easily tell how much rainfall to expect. This will guide them in planning best time to plant, best time to harvest, and the best way to actually go about drying their produce. We've seen that introduction of some of this simple climate change technology can actually go a long way. And again, recall the first slide where we shared that the country is rapidly urbanizing. With cell phones pretty much in the hands of pretty much every household, at least, you find out that this can actually be a means. We could also try to empower them by introducing simple climate smart technology to actually help them expand on some of their farming activities. And truth is, there's quite a bit of challenges to how some of this can be achieved. We know already the impact of COVID. We know that this has disrupted most supply chain activities along the value chain. Limitation of movements for wage and informal workers, as well as limited access to specialized support. Sometime late last year, in some of the farms we're supporting, it became a challenge to even bring what we call test strips. Test strips used to test for grains level of contamination for mycotoxins. You realize that most of the efforts had been diverted towards developing test strips for COVID. So, by extension, what this meant was that the farmers couldn't, their grains couldn't meet the required requirements for multinationals to offtake from. And this also affected their livelihood. So I think whilst we continue to abide to safety and COVID-19 hygiene protocols, it will be also important to continue the sensitization to smallholder farmers about the dangers of COVID-19. Then also, an unfortunate or sad recurring incidents in most of the farming belts in the northern parts of Nigeria, specifically the North Central, Northwest, and Northeast. At least for those of the Nigerians on this conference, we know of the rising incidents of banditry and kidnappings. And why is this important? We shared earlier already that food inflation is about 21%. This primarily you can actually link this directly to the incidence of insecurity in these farms, because you have situations where farmers themselves can't even go to the farms as much as they would love to, because it's either, they are now paying wages or paying for some form of paying to some of these organized criminal groups using their own farm produce to pay so that they were allowed to carry out the farming activities, or in cases they themselves actually abducted. So this is also a cause of worry, and we believe that one of the ways to achieve this will be engagement. I'm particularly grateful for this conference we're having. I would also think it would be important, perhaps in coming conferences to perhaps have, to have a feel of the whole elephant, so to speak, have representative from other parts of the government, maybe from the Ministry of Trade and Investment, to also, let's have their 2 cents on some of the ways we can actually combat some of this. But I believe engagement with relevant stakeholders, especially governments, SMEs, and NGOs, as well as security agency, will play a vital role, especially as food insecurity is becoming a worrisome trend now. And of course, we all know about the economic decline. The economy contracted about 9% at the end of last year, and we don't see this improving anytime soon, especially with rising inflation rates. And for SMEs in the agricultural space, I think what we propose to help them to be a bit resilient to this, to introduce agricultural business management training. Again, we found out that most of them, these are small, medium-scale businesses with little or no knowledge of how to manage their fortunes, especially in a declining economy. So we were proposing also to, if as part of their training, to also include some form of structured and robust agricultural business management training on how they can navigate this smoky economic decline. And yes, with that, I would like to say thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Obiora, for that. That was very insightful. Okay, very quickly, because we are out of time entirely, we'd like to take a couple of questions. Somebody typed out a question here. I'm going to read it out. This question, I believe, is for Mr. Joe Deswat, who actually typed out an answer in the chat. You can read up on his own response. I want Obiora to please give us his own response to this question. Somebody said, can the speakers please comment on the tension between growth of agribusiness in COVID-19 economic recovery and the negative impact on the environment, and in brackets such as production of methane gas from ruminants and deforestation as cropping expands? Very quickly, if you can give us your view on that.
Dr. Uba, if I can have that question again. I'm going through the comment sections that I respond to.
All right. I'll read that again. It says, can the speakers please comment on the tension between growth of agribusiness in COVID-19 economic recovery and the negative impact on the environment, and then in brackets, such as production of methane gas from ruminants and deforestation as cropping expands?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Ba. I think in answering this, I would say, first off, COVID-19 has again brought to the fore what is important and what is more of a priority to us here. So, like, I would answer this again by saying, using the local panels, it is someone who is well-fed. It's someone who is alive, you know, that can think of how he can actually. It's someone who is alive and well that would think of how he can actually contribute, you know, in improving the environment. So for now, I think the short-term measure here will be ensuring that agribusinesses still continue to survive, especially with COVID-19. Yes, the environment will continue. Managing and keeping the environment intact will continue to be an important issue. You know, however, I think right now, prioritizing what will be most important right now will be to ensure food security and ensuring that these agribusinesses survive, especially within this COVID-19 pandemic, especially also try to recover from it.
Okay, thank you very much for that response. I'm sure the person who posed that question would have gotten something from it. I'd like to say thank you once again to all the panelists. Okay, I have a question for Mr. Adeolu Akiyemi. Are you still there, sir?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, someone sent me a chat, a private chat in the form of a question. It says, I am an entrepreneur and I have a business idea. In a few sentences, how can I convince my bank to back me up?
Okay, so my very few sentences will be, the first thing you want to do is go beyond idea. The banks typically here don't back ideas, they back products. So the first thing you want to do is develop a minimum viable product, have something, you know, that you can show. Have something that is already in a form that, you know, what you're asking for money for is very direct. I want to produce 1,000 copies because I've already created effective demand. These are the requests of people that want to buy, and this is what I'm doing to try to meet it, versus at the level of an idea. The truth is, once a business starts, you will find reasons to modify your strategy. You will find what works, you find what doesn't work. People don't back your ideas before it gets to the stage where you have learned some things from the customers already and are ready with an MVP that you can now scale. So my idea, my thoughts are, develop that idea further, experiment with it, test the market with it before you go for backing.
Okay, thank you very much. A question for Yemisi, very quickly, please. If Yemisi is there. It says, if multinationals deal directly with SMEs via dedicated departments, will that help bring down the costs of their products? That question is for Yemisi. Should I take it again?
Fine, please, could you take the question again? Yes.
Okay, it says, the question says, if multinationals deal directly with SMEs via dedicated departments, that is, I take that to mean via dedicated departments in the multinationals themselves. So will that help bring down the costs of their products?
Well, it's not good. It has nothing to do with cost of the product. It has more to do with trainings, have more to do with decision making. So what this would amount to is not just about the product, it's about the entire decision-making process, whereby an SME, probably let's say someone like HR, there is the
Seem to be losing EMC. Okay, we seem to be losing EMC. Maybe we'll give her a moment or two to get back to us. And then finally, Dr. Atef, someone sent a chat. I don't know if it's a question. It seems like it's more of an opinion. If you are there, Dr. Atef, it says China's government style is not democratic. I think the person is pointing out that you use the Chinese model. It says China's government style is not democratic. Then is that a factor in government support for SMEs? Okay, it is a question. Did you get the question, Dr. Atef? Dr. Atef, are you there? Okay, I don't think Dr. Atef is there. I don't think Dr. Atef is there, but the question, it states that said China's government style is not democratic, and the person was asking if that is a factor in support for SMEs. That's because China does not operate a democratic government system. Does that make it easier for the government to support SMEs in that particular country, citing the fact that in a democratic setting, you have the legislature, you have the executive, decisions will have to be tossed back and forth and argued in the Senate, in the House of Representatives before certain decisions are taken to assist SMEs and micro businesses. So the person was asking that if the fact that China, the Chinese government is not a democratic one, does that make it faster and easier for SMEs to get aid from the government? If Dr. Atef, if you are here, if you got that question, you can please feel free to post your response via chat during the remainder of this conference. All right, now, ladies and gentlemen, we have gotten to the end of this conference. I'd like to thank all our panelists for taking our time to be here today. It was very wonderful of you, very generous of you. We have learned so much from your wealth of experience, from your collective and individual wealth of experience. For those who joined us later, the topics that were tackled by our panelists, Dr. Atef spoke on the role of government in survival of SMEs in Sub-Saharan Africa. Yemisi, she gave us a very sublime lecture on how multinationals can help SMEs grow in Africa. Then after that, we had Adeola Akiemi, who gave us a breakdown of the challenges of entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship in Africa, using Nigeria as a case study. Then Joe Deswa talked to us about the effect of COVID-19 on the agricultural industry in the world and Sub-Saharan Africa especially. Then finally, Obiora just gave us a good lecture on how the World Trade Organization can help empower SMEs in agriculture. If you notice, the central theme were SMEs, agriculture, and then with respect to COVID-19, government policies and the WTO. This conference was meant to address some of the challenges and questions that entrepreneurs or people who are thinking of going into entrepreneurship would face or are facing right now. And I hope our panelists provided some insights that will assist you as you go along. I'd like to say a very big thank you to the entire board of UNISMO, all the members, the planning committee, the media committee, my co-moderator, Adam Johnson, who unfortunately had to drop off because he has another engagement. Dr. Abdulrahman Fagro, you're still here. You're here. Thank you very much for being here. In the absence of any other questions, in the absence of any other comments, I would like to bring this conference to a close. Thank you very much, everybody. Very quickly, UNISMO is it stands for the United International SMEs Organization, based in the Middle East, but we are worldwide. We have board members from all over the world, and we put together these programs, these seminars, these conferences for the good of small businesses, micro businesses. So we have a website. We shall be getting in touch with you. All that was discussed here today was streamed live on YouTube. You can go to YouTube and get the video and watch it for yourself. If you have any questions, you can reach me directly via chat or via mail. And the speakers, each of them, they put their details out on their presentation. So when you get them and you read them, if you have any other questions, you can also reach out to them. Thank you, Yemisi. Thank you, Joe Deswat. Thank you, Biora. Thank you, Dr. Atef. Thank you, Adelu Akiemi. You guys have been wonderful. Ramin, if you have anything to say before we close out.
We would like to thank everybody in this event, and it is not the only one. We are in Africa, and now will be moving to, maybe Adam help me, to India, hopefully to India in September, and we would like you to join us. We are very grateful for the speakers who put their knowledge and experience for everybody in the world. This is the way we exchange and add value. We add value with the very high professional people like you to the industry, and this is what is needed now. Since the COVID, we need to meet online, and this is happening, and this is one experience, and we are also available to join other organizations, committees all over the world if they want any assistance and help through UNISMO. Thank you very much. Back to you, Dr.
All right, thank you very much. Before I forget, Dr. Raed was the host of this meeting. He was one that brought us all together. Thank you very much for hosting this meeting and to help, helping us be the administrator for this particular meeting. My name is Ifani Uba, and I'd like to wish you all a productive week. I'd like to wish you all, please continue to observe the safety protocols as you go to work, as you work from home. Please continue to observe the social distancing requirements. And the next time we meet, I believe and I pray that it will be under better circumstances.
Thank you.
Namaste.
Thank you, Dr. Oba, as well. If you allow me, can we have a group photo, please?
Oh, okay. Please, could everybody please let us have please put on your screens your videos. Everybody, please. Oh, thank you. Lovely. Adeolu, we've already seen you. Please, can you put on your screen? Dr. Atef. All right. We're waiting for Dr. Raed and Dr. Atef. Okay, yeah, Dr. Raed, you're the only one left.
Yeah, he's coming, Dr. Atef. Yeah. Ready to go?
Ready to go.
1, 2, 3. Done. Have a great weekend. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.